There is a defining moment in every person's life when they finally realize that endless kindness is an invitation for disrespect. You do not lose your dignity overnight, it vanishes slowly. It disappears every time you remain silent when you should have spoken up, and every time you sacrifice your peace to keep someone else comfortable. Most people believe that to stop being walked all over, they must become loud, aggressive, or intimidating. But true power operates differently. The strongest individuals rarely need to raise their voices, because their presence alone commands undeniable authority. Today, we will uncover the psychology of quiet power. You will learn how shifting your internal discipline and mastering the art of silence can make others instinctively fear crossing your boundaries. If you want to know why the world treats you a certain way, you first have to look at the undeniable truth of how you treat yourself. This brings us to the first and most critical law of human dynamics, the mirror rule. The world is a mirror reflecting your own level of self-respect at you. Many people believe they are victims of circumstance. They wonder why their boss talks down to them, why their friends flake on plans, or why their romantic partners don't value their input. But the harsh psychological reality is this: you train the world how to treat you. And that training begins with the promises you make, and break, to yourself behind closed doors. Think about your daily habits. When you set an alarm for 6 a.m. but hit the snooze button 3 times, you are subconsciously teaching your brain that your own word means absolutely nothing. When you promise yourself you will start eating healthier, but cave to fast food the moment you feel stressed, you are demonstrating that your internal boundaries are weak. Every time you procrastinate, abandon a goal, or negotiate with your own laziness, you lower your internal value. You are committing an act of psychological self-betrayal. If your own mind knows that you cannot be trusted to follow through, how can you expect anyone else to take you seriously? Human beings are highly intuitive creatures. We are biologically wired to assess the status, confidence, and strength of the people around us within milliseconds. If you lack foundational self-respect, you will unconsciously broadcast a weak signal to everyone you interact with. This broadcast doesn't happen through words, it happens through microbehaviors. It is the way your shoulders slump, the way you break eye contact too quickly, the nervous laugh you let out when someone makes an inappropriate joke at your expense, or the way you physically shrink to take up less space in a room. Predatory personalities, those who naturally push boundaries and exploit others, can smell this lack of internal alignment from a mile away. They don't target you because they hate you, they target you because your unconscious broadcast told them that there will be no consequences for doing so. The fix to this is not to suddenly start puffing your chest and acting tough. Fake bravado is transparent. The only way to rewrite this broadcast is to rebuild your self-respect from the ground up through micro-commitments. Self-respect is built on a foundation of undeniable proof. You must start gathering evidence that you are a person of high value. Start ridiculously small. If you say you are going to read 10 pages of a book, read 10 pages. If you say you are going to the gym, you go to the gym, even if you just walk on the treadmill for 15 minutes. You must become a fanatic about keeping your word to yourself. As you stack these small, private victories, something magical happens. A quiet, undeniable confidence begins to take root in your subconscious. You stop apologizing for taking up space. Your posture naturally straightens. You hold eye contact a second longer. You stop rushing your words because you finally believe that what you have to say is worth listening to. When you establish an ironclad standard of how you treat yourself, the outside world will intuitively recognize that standard and rise to meet it. Once you begin establishing a baseline of self-respect, you will immediately crash into the greatest obstacle of human psychology. It is the deep, biological desire for validation. We are social creatures, and for thousands of years, being cast out from the tribe meant certain death. Because of this ancestral wiring, we possess a desperate need to be liked. We call it being a nice guy or a sweet girl, but in reality, chronic people-pleasing is not rooted in kindness at all. It is rooted in fear. It is a survival mechanism where you continuously sacrifice your own needs to ensure nobody gets upset with you. When you suffer from the disease to please, you become a chameleon. You change your opinions depending on who is in the room. You laugh at jokes you do not find funny. You say yes to favors when every fiber of your being is screaming to say no. You bend your own rules to keep others comfortable. But when you spend your entire life changing colors to match your surroundings, you eventually forget your original shade. You lose your identity. The greatest danger of seeking approval is that you completely outsource your emotional state. You hand the keys to your self-esteem over to the general public. If you operate this way, you are living in a state of dangerous emotional dependence. When people praise you, you feel elated. The applause becomes a potent drug. But when someone criticizes you, ignores you, or simply forgets to validate your effort, the withdrawals begin. You spiral into anxiety, wondering what you did wrong. You must understand that as long as a compliment has the power to make your day, an insult will always have the power to ruin it. To command absolute respect, you must declare emotional independence. You must detach your self-worth from the erratic, unpredictable opinions of the crowd. True power is entirely internal. When your value is self-generated, criticism loses its sting. You become impervious to the manipulative tactics of those who use praise and withdrawal as weapons. This brings us to authenticity as your ultimate armor. Fearing being disliked creates a life of constant, exhausting compromise. But when you stop performing and start living truthfully, a fascinating shift occurs. Yes, you will offend some people. You will naturally repel certain individuals who preferred the weaker, highly compliant version of you. Let them walk away. Their departure is not a loss, it is a necessary filter. Ironically, the more you stop chasing acceptance, the more people begin to respect you. Authenticity always commands more admiration than a carefully crafted performance because it signals that you are entirely secure in who you are. With a foundation of self-respect and emotional independence, you must now translate that internal power into external action. You must build the architecture of your boundaries. Imagine a pristine, highly valuable estate with lush gardens but absolutely no fencing. It does not matter how beautiful the property is. Eventually, wanderers will trample the grass, animals will ruin the flower beds, and strangers will harvest the fruit. Your time, your empathy, your energy, and your resources operate on the same principle. If you do not demarcate where your property lines end and the outside world begins, people will trespass. And the brutal truth is that you cannot blame a trespasser if you never bothered to put up a sign. Setting boundaries is not about building a massive, hostile wall to keep everyone out. It is simply about installing a gate and deciding who gets the key. The most crucial tool in your boundary architecture is the unapologetic no. Time is your most finite and non-renewable currency. Every time you say yes to an unnecessary demand, you are saying no to your own peace, your own goals, and your own life. Yet, many people preface their boundaries with weak justifications. They say, "I am so sorry, but I cannot make it," or "I apologize, but I do not have the bandwidth right now." Every time you insert an apology where one is absolutely not required, you frame your own needs as an inconvenience. You signal to the other person that you feel guilty for protecting your own energy. This weakness invites negotiation. Drop the apology. "I will not be able to attend. That does not work for my schedule. I am unavailable for this project." A clean, decisive refusal commands instant respect. It shows that you value your own time far above the temporary discomfort of disappointing someone else. Furthermore, boundaries must be maintained through calm consistency rather than explosive aggression. People falsely equate setting boundaries with conflict. They tolerate bad behavior for months, letting the resentment boil quietly inside them, until one day they explode in a screaming match. But aggression is not strength, it is a broadcast that you have lost emotional control. The person making you angry is the person who controls you. The most intimidating and effective boundary is the one delivered with absolute stillness. When someone crosses a line, a calm, emotionless correction is infinitely more powerful than a shouted demand. You do not need to argue. You do not need to defend your position. You simply state the standard and enforce the consequence. If someone speaks to you disrespectfully, you do not shout back. You look them in the eye and state that the conversation is over until they can communicate properly, and then you leave the room. Calm consistency teaches the world that your standards are permanent laws of nature, not temporary emotional outbursts. There is a profound vulnerability in the human ego. It possesses an insatiable urge to be understood and validated. Because of this, when our decisions are questioned, our default setting is to over-explain. We lay out our reasoning, we offer excuses, and we nervously fill the silence to make sure the other person does not think poorly of us. But here is the undeniable truth about human dynamics. The moment you begin over-explaining yourself to someone who has not earned access to your inner thoughts, you bleed power. When you justify a decision, you are subconsciously asking for permission. You are placing the other person in a position of authority, allowing them to judge the validity of your choices. If you tell someone you cannot attend an event and then launch into a 5-minute explanation about how tired you are and how busy your week has been, you invite a debate. You give them angles to attack. They might tell you that you can just come for an hour, or that you need to get out more. A person of high self-respect does not debate their boundaries. They simply state them. Silence often carries infinitely more weight than 1,000 carefully chosen words. Mastering the pause is one of the most intimidating skills you can develop. In Western culture, we are terrified of dead air. We rush to fill quiet moments with nervous chatter. But if you can learn to become completely comfortable in the silence, you gain an immense tactical advantage. Imagine someone makes a passive-aggressive comment or attempts to insult you in a professional setting. The natural reaction is to get defensive, to snap back, or to laugh it off nervously to ease the tension. Instead, try doing absolutely nothing. Hold unbroken eye contact. Keep your facial expression completely neutral. Let the silence stretch for 3, 4, or 5 seconds. Do not break the gaze. In that stretching silence, the dynamic violently shifts. The insult hangs in the air, exposed and awkward. The burden of the uncomfortable silence falls entirely on the aggressor. In almost every case, they will begin to backtrack, nervously laugh, or explain away their own comment because the psychological weight of your silent stare is too heavy for them to carry. You did not have to raise your voice. You did not have to descend to their level. You conquered them with absolute stillness. This is the essence of emotional non-reactivity. Toxic individuals, manipulators, and bullies are emotional vampires. They feed on chaos. They throw a stone at you specifically to watch the splash. When you react with anger, frustration, or visible hurt, you reward their behavior. You prove to them that they hold the remote control to your nervous system. Think of a shallow puddle and a deep lake. If you throw a rock into a puddle, the water splashes everywhere. It is chaotic and messy. If you throw that same rock into a massive, deep lake, it creates a tiny ripple and then is swallowed forever by the sheer volume of the water. When you master your internal world, you become the deep lake. People can hurl insults, create drama, or test your boundaries, but your emotional depth absorbs it without disturbing your surface. When an aggressor realizes they cannot control your emotional state, they lose all interest in playing the game. They will retreat, and they will fear ever testing you again. If silence is your weapon, solitude is your fortress. We must address the root cause of why people tolerate disrespect in the first place. It is rarely because they enjoy being treated poorly. It is almost always because they are terrified of the alternative. We put up with toxic friendships, disrespectful romantic partners, and manipulative colleagues because we are gripped by a primal fear of being alone. We would rather sit at a table where we are insulted than eat by ourselves. We would rather stay in a room where we are taken for granted than walk out into the empty hallway. As long as you fear loneliness, you will always be a hostage. You will always negotiate your own dignity for a seat at the table. The ultimate form of leverage in any human dynamic is the genuine, unblinking willingness to walk away. In business negotiations, they call this your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If your only alternative is a reality you are terrified of, the other side holds all the cards. But if you are perfectly willing to stand up, shake hands, and leave the room without a deal, you are bulletproof. This same principle applies to human respect. You must cultivate a deep, profound appreciation for your own company. You have to willingly enter the crucible of solitude and face the quiet room. You must learn to sit with your own thoughts, pursue your own goals, and find absolute peace in the absence of a crowd. When you learn to love your solitude, you undergo a massive psychological upgrade. Your baseline becomes peace. Your baseline becomes quiet contentment. Therefore, anyone who wants to enter your life, whether as a friend, a partner, or an associate, must bring more value to the table than the silence they are disrupting. If they bring drama, disrespect, or constant anxiety, the calculation becomes very simple. You just point them to the door and return to your peace. People can instinctively feel this energy on you. They know when they are dealing with someone who is desperately clinging to them, and they know when they are dealing with someone who does not strictly need them to survive. The person who is unafraid to be alone is the most dangerous person in the room. You cannot threaten them with exile, because they are already the king or queen of their own island. When you stop fearing the word goodbye, you force the world to start treating you with reverence. They know that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. And the moment they disrespect the privilege, access is permanently revoked. We have established that you must build self-respect, cure the disease to please, set firm boundaries, and master the weapon of silence. But none of these concepts will protect you if you fail to implement the final mechanism of human dynamics, the law of consequence. Many people believe that communicating a boundary is enough. They sit down with a disrespectful friend, a demanding boss, or a toxic partner, and they clearly state how they wish to be treated. They lay out the rules. But weeks later, the same disrespectful behavior occurs again. The mistake here is believing that people respect words. People do not respect words. People respect consequences. If you establish a boundary but fail to enforce a consequence when that boundary is crossed, you have not set a rule. You have simply made a suggestion. Worse, you have just taught the other person that your boundaries are bluffs. You have shown them that you will complain, you will argue, and you might even get angry, but ultimately, you will not actually do anything about it. A boundary without a consequence is an invitation for endless manipulation. To command unshakable respect, your actions must align flawlessly with your conditions. If you tell a colleague that you will no longer respond to work emails after 7 p.m., and they email you at 8 p.m., you must not reply. If you reply just this once because it seems urgent, you destroy your own credibility. If you tell a romantic partner that you will not tolerate being yelled at, and they raise their voice, you must immediately leave the environment. You do not stay and try to calm them down. You do not argue back. You execute the consequence swiftly and without emotion. The most respected individuals in the world never make empty threats. They make promises. When they state that a certain behavior will result in a loss of access to their time, energy, or resources, it is a guaranteed outcome. The moment you become a person whose actions reliably and ruthlessly match their words, people will treat you with a level of caution and reverence you have never experienced before. They will realize that your dignity is an impenetrable fortress, and any attempt to breach it will result in their own immediate exile. Everything we have discussed today, from the way you hold eye contact in the face of an insult to the willingness to walk away from a toxic room, requires one foundational element to survive. It requires discipline. The world is obsessed with motivation. We watch videos, read books, and listen to speakers hoping to feel a sudden burst of courage that will change our lives. But motivation is an emotion, and emotions are temporary. Motivation rises and falls with the weather, your blood sugar, and the amount of sleep you got the night before. If your self-respect relies on motivation, your character will be fundamentally unstable. Discipline is entirely different. Discipline is the ability to act strictly according to your principles, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Think of a master blacksmith forging a magnificent sword. Every single strike of the hammer against the glowing metal seems repetitive. The process is slow, exhausting, and unglamorous. But with each strike, the impurities are hammered out. The metal becomes stronger, sharper, and infinitely more durable. Your daily habits work in the same way. Every time you wake up exactly when you plan to, you strike the iron. Every time you refuse to over-explain yourself to a critic, you strike the iron. Every time you walk away from a conversation that disrespects your peace, you strike the iron. No single action changes your life in a day. But strung together over months and years, these disciplined choices forge a character that cannot be easily broken. When you quietly develop this level of discipline, a profound transformation occurs. You begin waking up each morning with a sense of direction that is entirely independent of the world's opinion. Your choices are guided by wisdom instead of fear. You stop fearing rejection because your value comes from your own integrity. You stop fearing disrespect because your dignity no longer depends on another person's behavior. You will discover that the respect you spent years desperately searching for in the eyes of other people was always waiting to be built inside you first. When you walk into a room carrying this aura, you do not need to demand attention. You do not need to prove your intelligence, flaunt your status, or raise your voice. Your life itself becomes the message. Your consistency earns trust. Your stillness earns authority. People will instinctively understand that they are standing in the presence of someone whose respect cannot be bought, whose standards cannot be lowered, and whose quiet power cannot be shaken by the passing winds of the world. Master yourself, and the world will have no choice but to respect you.